God. In every single country, you have these conformity cults. In the United States, it's all about the Native Americans. You have to respect the culture of the Native Americans. You have to respect their history, and you can't really be critical of it because they were the people who were here first, and there were Native Americans here thousands of years ago, and they were here before the Europeans arrived and ruined everything. And so you have to respect their history. You can't talk about the fact that they had all sorts of satanic rituals, cannibalism, and ritual human sacrifice. You can't really talk about that. You have to just focus on this narrative that they were noble savages and they had this beautiful civilization and everything was just wonderful until the Europeans arrived. You have to accept this narrative. In Mexico, it's all about the Aztec, La Azteca. You have to respect La Azteca, the Aztec civilization, because they were really truly the founders of Mexico, and you have to respect their culture and their history, because before the Europeans came, they had a wonderful, wonderful, sophisticated civilization, and then the Europeans came and they just ruined everything. Every single Mexican is Azteca. Every single Mexican, even if you have red hair and blue eyes, you are Azteca, okay? Everybody Azteca, everybody. You have to respect La Azteca. I remember I did a documentary years ago about narco violence, specifically on the occultic religions of the narcos, how the narcos believe in occultism and witchcraft, brujeria, and all that stuff, and how it connects with the savagery and the sadism and the utter sanguinary bloodshed of the narco cults of Mexico. And there was a Mexican guy who was helping me do the documentary, but he told me that after the documentary was completed, he would help spread the word out about this documentary to people that he knew in Mexican media. And so when the documentary was completed, he said, no, I refuse. I don't want to do it. I don't want to help you. I don't want to help you promote. I don't want to help you promote. You got to really accentuate the O. I don't really want to help you promote this piece of propaganda. That's what it is. It's propaganda because you talk about the Aztecs, and I cannot help promote something that's critical of the Aztecs. I can't help you do that. No. And he refused to do it. He refused to actually do what he told me he was going to do. Why? Because it went against the narrative. It went against the conformity cult of Mexico, which is La Azteca. You have to respect the Aztec civilization. Hell, the freaking flag of Mexico has what on it? It has the hawk and the snake in the hawk's beak, because this is something that is part of Aztec lore, that when the Aztecs were trying to find where to settle in Mexico, they saw a cactus with a hawk and a snake was in its beak, and that was somehow a good sign from the gods that this was the place to settle, something like that. So the Mexicans adopted this. So the whole fantasy, the whole narrative surrounding the Aztecs, which entails this whole concept of the noble savage, it is a part of Mexican society. It's a part of Mexico's conformity culture. It's a part of Mexico's conformity cult. Now, in the West Bank, where the Palestinians live, they have their own conformity cult. It's this idea that the Palestinians are descendants of the Canaanites. Yes, they actually have this narrative in their society because they want people to believe that the Palestinians were always living in the West Bank. And so in order to solidify this narrative, they have to prove that they are Canaanites, which is actually impossible given the fact that the Canaanites were a Hamitic people who were actually more so related to Phoenicians, ancient peoples of Lebanon, than they are current-day Palestinians. I'm pretty maybe it's possible that there's someone in the West Bank with a little bit of Canaanite blood, given the fact that the Canaanites did live in that land. But for the most part, Palestinians today are the descendants of people who settled from Egypt, or they settled from Arabia, Yemen, they settled from Greece. Some people even settled from Italy and Spain, and there are some people in the West Bank who are the descendants of German settlers. Yes, this is actually a thing. Palestinians are actually a very racially diverse people. They're not really descendants of Canaanites, but yet again, they have this narrative because they want to convince people that they are 100% native. Well, I mean, if you're born there, you're a local and you're native, yes. But you don't really have to prove that your people have been living there for thousands of years. It's ridiculous. But anyway, that's their conformity cult, and you have to conform to it. You have to abide by the narrative. Just like in Mexico, you have to abide by this narrative that the Aztecs were this wonderful civilization and the Spaniards were the real savages. Isn't it amazing how they reverse things on people? It's like an abuser who abuses his victim, and then he accuses the victim of being the abuser. It's literally the same exact thing. Here you have the Aztecs taking indigenous people, cannibalizing them, cutting them up to pieces, ritually slaughtering them on pyramids. The Spaniards come in, liberate the indigenous people from the Aztecs, and the Spaniards are the bad guys. It's crazy. It's crazy how these conformity cults work. In Japan, they have their own conformity cult. It's this idea that the emperors of Japan were always living in Japan. And I'm not sure how many people in Japan believe this today, but at one point in time, people in Japan collectively, generally believed that the emperor was the descendant of a sun goddess named Amat-Ersu. It sounds almost Semitic, kind of like the Arabian goddesses Anat and Al-Uzza, and not Al-Uzza, but it sounds like the Arabian goddess Anat. Amat-Ersu, the sun goddess. And they believed that the emperor descended from the sun goddess. When the reality is that the royal family in Japan is actually, it actually descends from a family that originally came from Korea. This is a historical fact, because if you actually study the ancient settlement of Japan, a lot of the people in Japan today are the descendants of Koreans. They are the descendants of people, ancient people, who migrated from Korea to Japan. And the royal family descends from the people who came from Korea. So in Japan, they have this ancient burial site. It's the royal burial site. It's the ancient burial site where members of the royal family have been buried. And some of these tombs are extremely, extremely ancient. And for decades, actually, archaeologists have been really wanting to explore this royal graveyard. I think since, I want to say 1976, archaeologists have been requesting permission to explore this royal gravesite. And the Japanese have always really impeded such exploration. And then in 2000, I want to say 2008, a team of archaeologists were finally allowed to explore the royal gravesite. But the Japanese told them, you have 45 minutes. That's all you have. 45 minutes, that's not enough time. That's all you have. That's all you got. So they entered this royal gravesite, and literally, there was a bunch of people watching them. Literally, on the second when 45 minutes were up, they were like, you gotta go, you gotta go. So really, they didn't really find anything because they didn't have enough time. It takes a lot of time to explore an ancient burial site. Now, why are the Japanese so adamant about people not really exploring the ancient royal gravesite? Well, it's because it would prove further the fact that the royal family in Japan is Korean. That's it. That's the only reason why. They had this legend, they had this lore that the emperor, I can't say it in their accent, the emperor descended from the sun goddess, Amaterasu. So you can't really go against that narrative. So that is the conformity cult of Japan. In Turkey, it's the Armenian genocide, and it's also this idea that the people in Anatolia, what is today called Turkey, are actually Turks. Yes, they are Turks in the sense that they have collectively agreed that they are Turks, right? So it's just like we agree that we're Americans, even though many of us are descendants of people who came from different parts of the world. We all collectively agree in this idea of the American. And so in this cultural concept, or in this structured cultural concept, okay, we are Americans, fine. But they're not really Turks, like in the sense that they are the same exact people who live in Turkmenistan. They're not. Now, they have this conformity cult because people in Turkey don't want to admit to the fact that their ancestors were just Greeks and other Indo-European peoples living in Anatolia who were conquered by real Turks from Central Asia, especially Turkmenistan. They don't like talking about that in Turkey. The Armenian genocide is another conformity cult. Everyone has to agree that the Armenian genocide didn't happen. And so most historians, almost all historians, with the exception of a handful, follow the narrative that the Armenian genocide did not happen. Every single country has some kind of conformity cult. Every single country. And you have to conform to it, or else you are considered to be just a weirdo, or you're considered to be evil, or somehow just a menace. I remember when I was in junior high, elementary school, high school, I was told about the Native Americans and how they were this wonderful people. And then you find out, wait a second, the Native Americans is kind of like this broad brush that they're using to categorize the indigenous people of America. You find out, well, there were other tribes. There were all these different tribes, and they had their own languages. They had their own civilizations. In some cases, they even had their own kingdoms, kind of like the Pequots, the Pequot War between the English and the Pequot Native Americans, or the Pequot Indians. The Pequots had their own government. They had their own kingdom. They were very powerful. I think they controlled much of Rhode Island, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, they controlled a lot of territory. And then you find out that there were tribes that were exterminated by other tribes. They were tribes that were hunted down by other tribes. What about those guys? No one talks about them. Everyone just wants to talk about the Europeans, the white people. That's another broad brush that they use to categorize different peoples. Because the reality is that the white man who conquered the Native Americans were Spanish, English. There were Dutch people who came. But I don't think the Dutch conquered any territory. But there were Dutch people who definitely came here. There were French people who came. Portuguese people who came. The white man is just a term that people use to generalize a diversity of different people who spoke different languages. Just like they use the Native Americans to generalize a huge diversity of different peoples, different tribes. And then you find out that they were actually Caucasians who were in North America. And no, I'm not talking about the Vikings. I mean, there were other people who came here, who were living here, who were Caucasian people. And they were slaughtered. What about those guys? So I laugh when I hear people say, well, we have to return the land back to the Native Americans or something. It's like, wait, which Native American? What are you talking about? Which tribe? And maybe Native American, like certain tribes, should be forced to relinquish territory that maybe their ancestors took from another tribe. Maybe they should give that tribe up to the descendants of whichever tribe they slaughtered back in the day. I mean, this whole nonsense of the Native American is just that. It's nonsense. It's a joke. The whole thing is stupid. It's like, before the white man came, you think these natives were thinking, well, we're all Native Americans here. We're all natives. That's right. We're all part of this title of native. No, they were thinking, I'm this tribe. I speak this language, and I'm about to rape this whole other tribe next door. It's ridiculous. But anyway, yeah. Conformity cults, everyone. Everyone has them, and they're quite toxic. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.